Hi again, it's Josh with another Endgame video, and I wanted to make a video to clarify another one of the positions in the Endgame simulator, and this one's the, quote, useful maneuver. And this video is going to highlight some of the important ideas that this Endgame simulator position highlights. First, I want to suggest that this video will make a lot more sense if you're already familiar with sort of the basic king and pawn versus king position, and there's a king and pawn ending in the Endgame simulator, which I suggest you practice playing against, and there's also an instructional video linked from there that will explain in more detail a lot of the concepts I assume you might already know for this video. So first I'm going to look over it in sort of an analysis board, and then we're going to play it out in the Endgame simulator. So the key idea with this position, I think, to sort of highlight the main ideas, first I'm going to show you sort of what doesn't work. And the first thing to recognize is that running your pawn immediately doesn't work. As you probably already know, a key sort of idea is to form a square between the pawn and where it's going and its diagonal, and sort of see how we form this square from here. And if the king is either in this square or can move into this square, then the position is going to be a draw, or the king can catch the pawn. So for example, if we push, right, what you'll see is the king, black king, will catch the pawn. So somehow we have to help sort of support our pawn with our king to prevent black from catching it. So the question is how? Now the first key idea is that we got to make sure that black can't force a drawn king and pawn ending, and you should be familiar with what those look like from the other video. But for example, we can't play something, we want to get our king over to the pawn, and for example, if we don't do it directly enough, we play something like this, what black is going to do is play king g4 and control this whole fourth rank, and now our king has no way of getting to the pawn to defend it. And obviously that's a draw. And also now we obviously can't push it because the enemy king is still inside the square of this pawn. So the other thought is if we try to sort of run the king up along this side of the pawn, what happens is we see that black is able to use his king to sort of push. The technique is called shouldering, sort of control squares to keep our king from getting to the optimal place. So as you see here, we try to get here, but see black comes with the king here, and what happens is our king needs to get to one of these squares in order to support the pawn and move forward. But see, black keeps the king from coming to e4, so now we have to do something like either f3 or d3, f3, and now when black comes here and we come here, what we end up with is, as you'll know from the other video, this is actually a drawn endgame. Because even though we have the opposition in some sense, we can't keep it because our king isn't in front of the pawn. This pawn obstructs our progress, see? So for example, we have the opposition, but when black breaks it with king d6, we can't step to d4 and maintain it, so we lose the opposition. So either, we bring our king back or something, and black keeps us from making any progress. And if you come here to try to be tricky, and he comes here, you can gain the opposition, but again, here, and there's no progress being made. So the only other possibility from this position is something like d5, but again, black steps backwards, and we just can't make progress. Something like this, the key move. Now here, he could lose if he let us get the opposition at the time, but as long as he gets here, now we can't advance with our king without him coming here, gaining the opposition, and then we have nothing but this check, king d8, and now it's going to be a stalemate because the only way to keep the pawn is stalemate. Again, for a better discussion of why sort of this position ends up being a draw, I suggest you watch the king and pawn versus king video, but this position is a draw. Now, if we try something like this, what we'll see is we have a similar problem, which is that, again, we can't get the opposition because our king can't get in front of the pawn. So what we see is if we try to get up here to sort of shepherd our pawn, black stops us by controlling these key squares and using his king to shoulder us away. So king f2, king g4. And again, black is able to get and control this square and get here in time. So what that suggests is that, paradoxically, actually the only way to promote this pawn is we want to get to squares where we can shepherd the pawn. We're actually going to run to the far side of the pawn because we can get here in time to either get our king in front of the pawn and get a winning king and pawn ending, or to sort of shepherd the pawn forward. And black can't get here as quickly as we can due to the strange geometry of the chessboard where we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and even though black is going in a straight line, it's actually not it's slower. So for example, we start with king e2, And now, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Black plays, say, king g4, king d3, king f5, and now black has successfully kept us away from these squares, but we're going to the far side of the pawn. And now he can't keep us away from c5, whereas he kept us away from e5, he can't stop c5, king e6, king c5, and now we have a winning position. And I'll explain to you why. If king d7, this we win in a standard king and pawn fashion. This should be obvious to you if you've reviewed the other more basic position. King d5, we've seized the opposition and we're in front of our pawn, so we're able to maintain the opposition. Wherever black goes, we're going to advance with our king and clear the way for our pawn. So if he goes to c7, we come to e6, and now we're already ready to clear our pawn. And if he plays king d8, trying to stop our pawn, we again seize the opposition with king d6. And look, now when he gives ground, our king advances, and now our pawn is all clear. We control all the key squares with our king. King e7, d5, and black can do nothing to stop our pawn. So, by the time we get our king here, it's already over because he can't stop us from getting the opposition and winning king and pawn ending. For example, if king e7, now here we need to be a little bit careful because, again, if we come here, black seizes the opposition, and this turns out to be a draw, largely because if we ever try to, if he goes back, he advances, and look, we have this drawn position from earlier. If we try something like this, black can maintain the opposition, and whenever we advance the pawn, look, we've transposed to that drawn position I discussed earlier. So, king c5, king e7, we got to be extremely careful not to let black get the opposition, but we can just play the king comes to e7, we just play king c6, and now we're winning still. If he plays something like king here, we advance with check here, and look, we make it to c7, our pawn's running through. If he plays after king c6, something like king d8, we'll just play here. We have the opposition, and it's a winning game again. Advance, control all the squares, and our pawn comes through. So this is a pretty simple position, but I think it highlights some important ideas. One is that you need to be careful in king and pawn endings to watch out to sort of know what the drawn positions look like. And again, it's positions where you can't get in front of your pawn, and black is able to control the squares sort of directly in front of the pawn, and we can't get the opposition. Know what positions are won, and that would be, for example, if we look a little earlier. Once we get the opposition and we're in front of the pawn, it's winning. And the last idea is to watch out for cases where black can sort of shoulder us away and prevent us from getting to the key squares. So in the case of this pawn, it's getting in front of our pawn. And we can't get to e5 or d5 because if we try that, say with f2, he controls these squares, prevents us from getting there in time. Instead, we have to take a much more direct route to get to the only square we can in front of the pawn, and that's c5. And now we have a winning position as long as we're careful the entire time to keep the opposition. Remember that if he plays e7, we don't want to play something like d5 and let him re-seize the opposition. So this video highlights some useful sort of king and pawn ending ideas. If you had some trouble with understanding the positions once it gets to this stage, or the positions I was saying was drawn, I suggest you review the king and pawn versus king position in the Endgame simulator and watch the instructional video. I hope this was clear, and let me know if you have